All right, cool, thanks. How's everyone doing? Thank you so much for attending this webinar. My name is Austin, and yeah, so this is going to be a webinar on virtual reality and augmented reality. So these are two technologies I'm really interested in, and I have experience in both. I work down in the White Plains Public Library, and I'm very fortunate to have all kinds of gadgets and toys to play with, and virtual reality and augmented reality being two of them. And so you're going to want to, if you have any questions during the talk, I'm going to be paying attention to the sidebar. So go ahead and use the questions tab, and I will try and keep an eye on that as we go along. And I'll actually have a copy of this slideshow available for you to download at the end. I'll provide you with a link. And Nyla will record this and put it on their website. So without further ado, who am I? My name is Austin Olney. I work down at the White Plains Public Library, like I said. And that's just above New York City, down in southern New York State. My title is Digital Media Specialist, and I do all sorts of classes on digital technology, whether it's for children, teens, or adults. I do a whole variety of different classes on technology. My background's actually in education. I got my teaching certification in social studies, and I had a pretty wild path, and I ended up working in IT, and I got my technology certification, and now, like I said, I teach technology classes at the White Plains Library. So I've actually written a couple of chapters for ALA on each of these topics, virtual reality and augmented reality, and these are books that are coming out soon. And let's see, an outline of the webinar. I want to give you just an overview of what, how exactly I set up this talk. So first thing I'm going to do is give you an overview of the two different technologies, talk a little bit about the history, and then I'll go into each. So first I'll start off with virtual reality, and I'm going to be using the term VR for short, and just so you know. And following virtual reality, I'll talk about augmented reality, referring to it as AR, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of both, which I think is very exciting. And then I'll open it up to a Q&A if you haven't asked questions already during the talk. So an overview of the two technologies. Don't mind the phone call in the background. Okay, so all right, so we got virtual reality and we got augmented reality. But you may have heard of this other term known as mixed reality. And furthermore, 360 video. So these are all related technologies. And so I just want to simply break down each one. So virtual reality, if you've seen Ready Player One, then you'd be familiar with this technology that they portray in the movie. Basically a fake world that is created with a computer, and with a headset, the computer attempts to trick your brain into thinking that you're in an environment that doesn't actually exist. Okay, and then augmented reality, you're not exiting reality, quote unquote. You are staying in the real world, but with augmented reality, you're getting digital content overlaid on top of the existing reality. So a simpler way of putting this is holograms. So I got a little picture of Leia from the Star Wars franchise. So a hologram would be an example of augmented reality. Mixed reality is when you're specifically physically interacting with the digital content, or the digital content is in some way interacting with the physical world. So mixed reality is basically a subset of augmented reality. And these terms, they're thrown around so much. Sometimes they're misused, but this is the most clear way I can explain the three. So you can think of virtual reality, think of Ready Player One; augmented reality, holograms; mixed reality, think of something like the Power Glove for the original Nintendo, where you're actually interacting with digital content. Um, and 360 video is a related technology because it involves the capturing of video in all directions, which is great for viewing on a virtual reality headset or a smartphone. So yeah, there's a lot of different branches with these technologies, and I guess that's the point of why we're here today, to kind of look at the different branches. So a little bit of history. A lot of this started in the 1830s, believe it or not, with the original stereoscope. This is invented by a guy named Sir Charles Wheatstone. And this is before photos were invented, which I find fascinating because people were looking at 3D images before actual photographs were created. So Charles Wheatstone came up with the idea of taking two drawings and drawing them at slightly different angles to trick the brain into thinking that it's 3D by showing each image to each eye and using a stereoscope. So that's a starting point for this technology, the origins of 3D viewing. And so 100 years later, you got the ViewMaster stereoscope, 1939, and that used film for each eye. Some of you may be familiar with a stereoscope like that. And then during the 20th century, of course, we had the digital revolution. You got computers getting more and more complex, and right parallel with that technology growing, you have virtual reality technology growing and augmented reality technology growing. Now, the roots of each technology basically share. Augmented reality and virtual reality share roots, and they start to split sometime in the 60s, 70s, around there, where there's specific attempts to make each technology better. And it really blew up in the 2010s with consumers being able to get virtual reality and augmented reality headsets. I said I was going to say VR and AR, but I am using the full terms a lot. But either way, the technologies really blew up in the 2010s. You might have remembered the Google Glass, which was an augmented reality headset. You could put it on and see digital content on top of the world, on top of the real world. And it ultimately failed as a product, but I really think it was ahead of its time. That was in 2013. And then, of course, you got the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive and PlayStation's VR headset, all arriving in the past couple of years. And these are virtual reality headsets that you can get as a consumer. Now, there's high price points, relatively high price points with these technologies, but it's really cool that consumers can buy this on a mass scale. And then we have the upcoming Microsoft HoloLens, which I'm super excited about. Can't wait to use one of these. That's going to be like the Oculus Rift of the augmented reality world. So if I'm throwing a lot at you, never fear. I'm gonna go through each one and break them down as simply as I can. The whole point of this is that I want you to be able to incorporate these technologies in your libraries. Now, why? Why would you want to do that? Well, I find at the White Plains Public Library that a lot of patrons are interested in these technologies and they want to know more about them, and specifically they want to experience each one. Another reason, so with that, you want to provide for that need and give them the knowledge that they want and the experiences they want. Moving on beyond physical books, libraries are not strangers to formats besides books. Obviously, we have things like audiobooks. Now, AR and VR are not going to replace books. I don't think anyone thinks that. But it's just a cool thing to offer at your library or other institution. Um, so yeah. Liabilities, I just want to point out that you're going to want to take certain precautions before you incorporate these technologies in your libraries. You want to check the manufacturer's website of whatever particular device that you have. And, for example, for virtual reality, a lot of times the minimum recommended age is 13. And there's been cases of kids who have epilepsy, who use virtual reality, and end up having a reaction due to that, due to using the technology. So you're going to want to consider having a waiver. So we actually do this at the White Plains Library. We have a waiver for anyone that wants to use the virtual reality equipment. And we actually have, if the patron is under the age of 18, we have the parent or legal guardian come in and physically sign the waiver. That way we know for sure that that it's not being forged, because we all know teens. All right, moving on. So let's go through each one. So virtual reality, talk a little bit about it. The official definition is an artificial environment which is experienced through sensory stimuli such as sights and sounds provided by a computer, and in which one's actions partially determine what happens in the environment. So it's a fake world, and a lot of times you can interact with the objects in that world. All digitally based right now. Now the technology could change, but for right now it's all digital worlds that people are experiencing. Now, the way it works is that, well, there's two ways that you can use the technology. One is a specific high-end headset that you put on your head, and you use a computer to upload content to the headset, and you can experience it. You can use the content, and that's so. I guess what I'm getting at is that you have a physical headset on the one end, and on the other end you have headsets that have mobile phones inside them. So I'm going to break that down a little bit more, but there's basically two branches of VR. But in both cases, they cover the senses, they cover your eyes. It's kind of like headphones for your eyes, and so you look around and it tricks your brain into thinking that you have a different environment than the real one that you're in. And the cool thing about these headsets is that it responds to your head movement. So you can look around with your neck, and the content reacts to that. So it's really cool, and especially it's even cooler when you have controllers. And you can use the controllers, one in each hand, and actually use your hands to actually quote-unquote touch objects in the world. Okay, so on the one end of VR headsets, you have what I label here as low-end VR viewers. Now, these are headsets where you need a smartphone, and one of the biggest ones, one of the most popular VR headsets of this kind is the Google Cardboard. They actually released this. Well, they released it years ago, but in 2014, I believe it was, they included a Google Cardboard with the Sunday edition of the New York Times to kind of push this idea. Now, keep in mind, with a Google Cardboard, you can't just get it and experience virtual reality. You have to have a phone that is capable of producing virtual reality content. So not only does it have to be a smartphone, but it has to be a specific smartphone with a specific part known as a gyroscope, a 3D gyroscope. Now, the gyroscope of a phone is the part of the phone that responds to the tilt of the phone. So if you ever have your phone and you turn it from side to side and it switches from landscape view to portrait or the other way around, that would be an example of the gyroscope. But a big thing to consider here is that just because your phone can do that doesn't mean it has a gyroscope. Sometimes it has an accelerometer inside, and an accelerometer will not work for VR. So basically what I'm getting at is make sure your phone has a gyroscope and you check your documents for that. I think most iPhones have 3D gyroscopes, at least say iPhone 4 and up. So this, I gotta say, with this VR, this type of VR, using a smartphone to view virtual content, I don't necessarily recommend this form of virtual reality. I've used it. I've used both, obviously. This kind of VR gives me nausea, and that's one thing you're going to want to consider, because you don't want a patron to come in and get nauseous from using library equipment. It's just not a good scenario. You want them to be excited and have fun. And so that's why, obviously, I would recommend the higher end VR headsets. But then you're talking about, requiring a large budget, because not only do you have to buy the higher end VR headset, which is in the range of $500, but one thing people do not keep in mind is that you have to have a high end PC in order to use the headsets. So in the end, it comes out to being about a $1,500 investment. Now, if you have a PS4, that would actually be cheaper, because PlayStation has its own VR headset. So that would be about a $600 investment. But let's go through each one. So you got the Oculus Rift, which was actually bought out by Facebook. So this one, it's actually a very high-end headset. It's the best VR I've seen using the Oculus Rift. But you got to keep in mind that Facebook is watching. And then you have the HTC Vive, which they actually have two versions. They have a standard edition, and they have a Pro version. And the Pro has more features and higher end graphics. Let's see, we got some questions here. Okay, what kind of VR equipment? So at the library I work at, we have both an Oculus Rift. Actually, we have three of the higher end headsets, VR headsets. We have an Oculus Rift, we have the HTC Vive Standard, and we have the HTC Vive Pro. So, and like I said, I would recommend the Oculus Rift. I haven't actually used the PlayStation VR yet, but I've heard good things, that they have some good exclusive content that you'd want to consider. One of the fun things about VR is that when you're using it, you can actually portray what is being shown to an audience. So, in other words, what the person using the headset sees, you can portray on a screen, and it makes for a very, very fun time. Having a group of people with just one VR headset is super fun, especially when you can see what they're seeing. There's a lot of laughs. So considerations. I mentioned that if you're going to get a higher end VR headset, you're going to want a higher end PC, and you would check the manufacturer's website for the minimum system requirements. You want to have all your ducks in order, so to speak. Another thing is you're going to want to have an area sufficient to use virtual reality. So usually a 6 by 6 foot area is a good way, is a good amount of room to use. And you're going to have to put a couple of sensors. You're going to have to install a couple of sensors in that area. So these are just things you're going to want to consider. You're going to want to have an area. You could put the sensors on tripods if you want, and so that way you don't have anything permanent. But it is quite a setup to get a higher end VR headset installed. So these are just things you're going to want to consider. A big thing is sanitation. So we actually have wipes that that work where you don't want to use alcohol on the VR headsets, but we have wipes without alcohol that we can clean the headsets in between uses, so that the patrons, aren't sharing germs. And for that matter, you could also get disposable face masks. You can find those on Amazon. And so you could have each patron use their own face mask, which you put, you can see a little picture there. You can put basically a little piece of fabric in between the patron's face and the headset. And training is another thing. And now that I'm talking about it, the installation is another thing you're going to want to consider. Maybe you want someone to come in and actually install the VR for you. That might be something you have to consider. And in addition to that, training to how to actually use the equipment is something as well. All right, let's see. Is the equipment located at a dedicated space? Is your equipment located at a dedicated space, VR room? Okay, so great question. We actually have a set spot for the VR, and we have a VR setup that we can take on the road. So you can get a laptop that has the minimum system requirements of a particular VR headset and have a mobile, a somewhat mobile VR kit. So yeah, we have both. We're very fortunate with all the stuff we have at the library, and yeah, so we have both. And we haven't actually gone out on the road yet, but I'm very excited to get the VR kit going and be actually able to go to, say, a school or another library or some other outreach event and actually bring the VR to the people and let them experience it themselves. So some of the possibilities of VR. One of the things that you could do is essentially just letting the patrons use the equipment is a big thing. Like I said before, patrons are interested. A lot of them are not going to invest in this technology knowing that it's just going to improve, and they might not get any other chance except at their own public library to use the technology. If you're really trusting, you could lend the equipment, but that's a pretty pricey thing to lend out. I really think that with the rise of virtual reality, I really think that I think arcades are going to come back. V-arcades, I call them. I think that these institutions where you can go and use the virtual reality equipment, I think it's just going to blow up. You can see the picture of the guy on that fan flying apparatus, where in the game, I'm not sure what exactly he's playing, but he's probably flying around like a dragon or something. And it's probably awesome. And a lot of these experiences can be awesome. And I think that a lot of it is not something that people are going to personally invest in, but would rather go and use somewhere else for free, like at a library. They're actually experimenting with live omnidirectional content, and what that means is basically There are YouTube channels and Facebook live broadcasts of 360 content that can be viewed on a VR headset. So one of the examples is Paul McCartney actually took a 360 camera, put it on stage at one of his concerts, and allowed people to uh, I guess, attend the concert with a virtual reality headset through the 360 camera. I think it was a huge moneymaker, but it's a really cool idea that you could be virtually on stage with Paul McCartney as he played live. So, you could do events with it, where you have live events of that nature, where, hey, come and see Paul McCartney's concert, live, at the library. Who knows? There's a lot of different uh, ways you could use this technology. What we do here at the library is a very simple virtual reality 101 where the patrons can come in and use the equipment. It's real simple. And like I said, it's a ton of fun. We have a group of people. I hook up the virtual reality headset and I hook it up to the TV so that the rest of the class can see what is being viewed on the headset. And I talk about the technology kind of like what I'm doing right now, and then I just let them use it, and it is super fun. So that's probably that's the most realistic starting point for a library, I think. There's a lot of different ways that virtual reality is being used in the world. There's educational experiences where students can explore something like the pyramids of Giza. They're using it for therapy, actually, where people are being exposed to virtual items that, I don't know, for example, a soldier who has post-traumatic stress disorder, they could create some sort of environment that would, quote unquote, expose him to whatever situation he was in. I'm just looking at that picture on the bottom left. And somehow they're using this in therapy. Honestly, I don't know a lot about it, but it's just something cool that is happening in the VR world. And of course, with the virtual reality, you can have you can use the VR headsets for creative purposes. Let's see. If a library wanted to get, I'm reading a question. If a library wanted to get an Oculus Rift, what budget would we be talking about? Sensors can be. So all in all, it's probably going to be, to be safe, you would want, I'd say, about $1,600. And it all depends. And like I said, I'm going to have this slideshow available at the end, so you'll be able to look at everything I've written here. And of course, I'll have my info so you can reach out to me and ask more specific questions. So anyway, the creative possibilities are endless. It's really cool to let patrons, give them the chance to create their own worlds and create their own designs in a virtual environment. So we have this game called, well, I call it a game, but it's really an application that's called Tilt Brush, where you can actually draw 3D objects using the two handheld controllers of of one of the headsets that we have. You actually use your hand to draw and create 3D designs, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it's very cool to see, because within the headset you're getting a 3D perspective of a 3D model that you're working on with your physical hands, and it's a super cool experience. And I usually have that as one of the first apps for patrons to try. We're actually working on a project here at the library to recreate our city recreate it digitally. So actually create a 3D model of White Plains, and using Unity, a game making program, you can actually create the city and then use a virtual reality headset to to enter the city that you've created and look around. And it's super cool. I'm actually working with the planning department in the city, and we're creating realistic models based on the buildings in the city here. And one of the ideas is that you could get proposals. So you could get architectural proposals for, say, a building that's proposed. And you could use the VR headset to actually see what the building would look like in that virtual world. So that's just another creative possibility. All right, so moving on to augmented reality. So VR versus AR. Well, I have a little picture down here where you have reality on the left side. You see just a regular car. And then you have augmented reality, which is a digital car laid on top of the physical car. And then virtual reality, where everything is a virtual representation of a car on a road. So I like virtual reality. It's fun, but I really think that the future lies with augmented reality. I think that it's really young in its life, and I think it's just going to grow and grow and grow and really become a part of society um, as time goes on. So, like I said, it's holograms. The most simple way I can put it is augmented reality is holograms. Now, the definition here is an enhanced version of reality created by the use of technology to overlay digital information on an image of something being viewed. So, augmented reality, or AR, is already here. So, you might not know it, but we've been using augmented reality in our society already for years. So, one of the biggest examples, I guess one of the biggest milestones in augmented reality is in 1998 with the virtual first and 10 computer system. So if you ever watched a sporting game where they have digital ads or digital markings on the sporting field, that is an example of augmented reality. And it was one of the biggest breakthroughs in the technology in the modern in modern times. So in 1998, they had the first time that they actually, on a live broadcast, had augmented reality content on top of a football field. Now, you might have heard of Pokemon Go, and of course, Google Translate. And these are two examples of applications that use AR technology. Mobile augmented reality right now pretty much primarily exists on mobile devices. Like I said, the major augmented reality headset hasn't even come out yet, but you can still experience the technology with a mobile device. So the mobile device must have a camera equipped. So it's going to be something like an iPad. You see, I have a little picture there of an iPad looking at a picture of a couch. And what that is, that's an app called IKEA Place. And that allows users to overlay furniture on top of a camera feed in order to see what the furniture would look like in the room that the camera is pointing at. So in other words, it's basically a way for you to see how the furniture might look if you bought it and put it in the room. It's a really cool use of augmented reality. And Pokemon Go is another popular application where in 2016, I'm sure you've heard of Pokemon Go. It exploded and became very popular game for people to play. And it uses the camera feed of the device as a part of the game, in which they overlay Pokemon characters on top of the real world, essentially. So using your smartphone, you're basically bringing in Pokemon characters into the real world. And I think that eventually we're going to look back on Pokemon Go and really mark it as a significant breakthrough in augmented reality technology. And yeah, um, so how can you incorporate AR at your library? Well, one of the ways that we've done it here is with an app called Quiver, and this is an app where it's on Apple and Android. You can, using printed coloring book pages, you can have patrons draw, color in the coloring page. So it's primarily a children's program that you would use this with. Have the child color in the coloring book page, and then using the Quiver app, it actually digitally makes that coloring page come to life. And it's super awesome, and it works very well for a program because it's using all sorts of different learning. It's appealing to all sorts of different learning styles and learning levels. Because, I mean, you could just do a coloring book program, and that would be fun. But you're adding this layer of, let's take that coloring book that you're working on and make it come to life in the computer. Some of these pages that you have, you can actually turn the coloring book page that you colored into a game, and really simple. And it's a free app, so I would highly recommend Quiver. I mentioned before the Microsoft HoloLens. This is an upcoming augmented reality headset. Now, I think it's going to be very pricey. Right now, they're thinking it's in the $3,000 range, so very, very pricey. But I've seen videos on YouTube of people using it, and just listening to their excitement makes me excited. And it offers all kinds of different possibilities. One of them being the lack of need for monitors, computer monitors, or televisions. So basically, you put this headset on, and it gives you a visor over your eyes, a clear visor. So you're still looking at the room, but what it does is it tracks your head movement, and it overlays content on top of what looks like the room, what looks like um, the actual room. So you're looking at the actual room, but it makes it look like you have digital content that exists in the room with you. So it works good for monitors. So you can have multiple screens that appear to exist in space, but they don't. They just exist in the headset itself. And so obviously you can tell I'm very excited about it. I think that there's going to be a lot of societal possibilities with augmented reality. For example, being able to look at a hotel and seeing what rooms are available and where exactly on the building those rooms are located using augmented reality technology. So you could use something like the Microsoft HoloLens, or you could use your smartphone where you actually point the phone at the building and it would overlay that digital information on top of the camera feed. And you could use this for libraries, of course. You could point the smartphone, if you're using one, at a library and see the library schedules of classes or other events. You could look at items in a store and get information on those items. And if nothing else, just visualize complex processes. You see I have a picture on the bottom left there of a woman looking at the anatomy of the human body. So it's a good teaching tool. And I think a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily exist yet, but I think that's where we're headed. And yeah, so the future is exciting. I didn't talk about it, but there's cool local history possibilities. So for your library, you could have some sort of, feature where you could point the technology at different parts of your area and get content about that particular spot. So for example, with augmented reality technology, you could, in theory, have a smartphone app that you point at a specific part of your town, and it would give you historical information about maybe what was there before, what it looked like before, and so on. So there's cool local history possibilities. And you could use that same idea for something like a book display. Imagine being able to look at books on a shelf and be able to see, you know, a short tidbit about what the book is about, or who the author is. You could even look at the rating of the book. These are possibilities for the future that don't necessarily exist yet, but I think stuff like that is coming, and I think it's going to be awesome. Now, right now we have video conferencing rooms, and I think eventually we might get to the point where you have virtual conferencing rooms where you could actually put on a headset and communicate with someone else who also has a headset on but is in a completely different location. So you could see what their body movements and what they're saying as if they're in the room with you, but you could be on other sides of the planet. I think that will come with time. Social networking, I don't know exactly how this is going to work with virtual reality, but Facebook, like I said, acquired Oculus in 2014, and they bought it for $2 billion. And so they're obviously interested in the technology, and they plan on incorporating it into their future. So who knows what is going to happen with this technology. Business trends. A lot of the major digital tech companies are hopping on board the technology. You have Amazon that's releasing tools for digital world creation. Apple has released the augmented reality AR kit. And there's even talk of Google trying to bring back the Google Glass. So it ultimately failed in 2013. But like I said before, I think it was way ahead of its time. And I think that we're getting closer to a point where augmented reality will be more feasible and more appropriate for modern day society. So I think looking down the road very far, I think we might get to a point where we can put on contact lenses and actually see augmented reality content. And so then you wouldn't need a headset or a smartphone, and you could actually look at items and see content. Now, who knows what kind of world that would be? I might not even see that in my lifetime. I do want to say that we very often, I find that we tend to exaggerate the future and how quickly things will be. I think if you look back, 30 years ago, I mean, okay, here's an example. Back to the Future 2. They literally have the year 2015, and we're not exactly in the world that people in the 80s thought we would be at right now. I think that we tend to exaggerate how much change will happen. So if any of you are concerned about this technology, don't be. I think it's going to be a gradual change, but I think it has a lot of cool possibilities. You have people like Elon Musk, who's looking at trying to communicate with the brain and be able to send content to the brain. But like I said, I think this stuff is really far off, so I wouldn't fear. So takeaways from this webinar. I know I've thrown a lot at you, and I apologize for that, but I will give you my information, and I will give you this slideshow, and we will go from there. But the main takeaways that I want you to have is this is exciting. I find this stuff very exciting, and we literally have this technology here that's available for you to use, and it's awesome, and it really works well with patrons, especially teens. They just eat this stuff up, but adults as well. My main virtual reality classes are for adults, and that's pretty much because they can come and they can sign the waiver themselves, and I don't have to. A lot of teens aren't able to get their parent to physically come to the library. So my point is that a lot of my patrons who use virtual reality are adults, and they love it. Virtual reality is very big right now, but I think that augmented reality is really the one that's going to become a part of society, because you're not exiting reality. You're not going anywhere. You're staying in the real world, but you're just bringing the content to you. So if you work at a library, I think that your library could be a great resource for these technologies. Okay, so that's all I got. I will be happy to answer any more questions that you might have. And there is the link to the slideshow where you can download everything that I have here. I have my information. Feel free to send me an email or call my phone, and I will be happy to respond. Let's see. Have I done VR programs for seniors? I haven't specifically. So the question is, have I done VR programs for seniors? I haven't specifically done that. Usually I just open it up to adults. Sometimes seniors attend. Is there a particular reason why? But yeah, I mean, if a senior came to the program that I run for adults, they'd be welcome.
We'll give everyone a couple more minutes to get their last minute questions in. And Austin, I want to say thank you again for doing this webinar for us today. It was very informative. And we'll give everybody just about another minute or so if they have any last minute questions or want to take down Austin's information before we send everybody off for the rest of their day.
Great, thanks. Okay, the question. With makerspaces, libraries are entering the creator world, not just the consumer world. What AR, VR creation tools have you seen or recommend? Well, I recommend Unity. It's a game engine, and it works very well with virtual reality and augmented reality, actually. They have a free version, so Unity, I believe it's unity3d.com. And yeah, so Unity is a good one. If you're working with teens, Roblox Studio, believe it or not, is a very good way to use to create virtual worlds. Obviously, there's some controversy with Roblox if you haven't heard of it, but Roblox Studio doesn't have any controversy because it's just a game. It's Roblox's game engine, and I would recommend that as well for creating virtual content. Do you think with the AR you would have to have a signed waiver as well? Good question. We haven't gotten to that juncture yet. We've only done the Quiver program where you're using coloring book pages, and there, in that case, you're using an iPad. So obviously, we didn't have a waiver for that. But with something like the Microsoft Hololens, I would say yeah. Off the top of my head, we will probably require the waiver for augmented reality as well, because you're putting a headset on and getting digital content, and it could invoke some sort of reaction. No problem.
All right, it looks like we're going to wrap it up for this afternoon. Thank you again to all of our attendees and to Austin, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.